What's up everybody, Jesse here, and welcome to another episode of Gaming History. After covering Mario, Pokemon, and some other games, we're back once again with The Legend of Zelda. This time, we're putting a focus on Zelda 3. No, not A Link to the Past. We have the actual first concept and idea for the third Zelda game. What A Link to the Past became is completely different than what it started out as. A lot of people already know that development actually began on the NES, or Famicom, and was quickly moved to the Super Nintendo. However, a lot of people have still never heard Miyamoto's original plans for the game and what it was. In his own words, the game was actually finished and ready to be released. But what we ended up getting with A Link to the Past was a completely separate game than Zelda 3. All of this comes from a 1989 interview between Shigeru Miyamoto and Yuji Horii, where they discussed development of Zelda 3 and Dragon Quest IV with each other. The full interview can be found on Siliconera. In it, Miyamoto states, "I have a backlog of 4 or 5 games, all being developed at the same time. I'm currently working on 4 Super Nintendo games. From relatively simplistic titles to huge productions. And that doesn't even cover all of it. I heard Zelda 3 is going to be for the Super Nintendo. Have you already started working on it? Yes, we're making progress little by little. What's it going to be like? Basically, I intend to make a return to Zelda 1 style. This is something I've had in mind since even before we began making Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link." That's awesome. Ever since I started making the first game in the series, I've been saying the third Zelda will feature a party, one that consists of the protagonist, who is a mix between an elf and a fighter, a magic user, and a girl. The fairy that appeared in Adventure of Link was actually a party member designed for Zelda 3, a girl who looked a little like a fairy and whose role consisted of reconnaissance. Like the characters in action games that don't engage enemies in combat, but rather go and scout out the surroundings and return to you safely. It's only fun when action-adventure games let you choose who to send out. That's the sort of thing I'm thinking I'd like to put in Zelda 3. I've never been too particular about the story in games I've made in conjunction with Earthbound creator Shigesato Itoi. The stories of Mario and Zelda titles have always been supplemental to the actual gameplay. Action games only have stories attached to make the experience more interesting. Itoi is the one that writes the story, and I just help out a bit. So development is moving along. We're more or less finished already. Now we just have to wait until release. But the factories won't make any copies for us. Really? Even though you're producing it in-house? They have to make a ton of copies of Dragon Quest. I'd like to wait until it comes out before releasing the game. Once Dragon Quest fever sets in, this year is done for. Curiously, staggering the releases affects the demand for the Super Nintendo. How has it been, making your first RPG? We started out developing it as an action game, primarily. We've been careful to maintain a high degree of originality, noting where we've copied something from another game, though not substantially, and where we've done something completely new. We're proud of ourselves for developing the game structure. The game structure of RPG titles is already more or less settled upon, and an RPG overworld is something anyone can make. But that's all the more reason to ask yourself whether it's good enough to use the same template as everyone else and simply expand the story on top of that. That's where the challenge comes in. These days, there's a gap between players who prefer a solid story to having new features, and players who prefer having new features to a solid story. That's right, it's difficult to balance the two. Do you think you'd like to continue making RPGs in the future? I hope to make a new game structure for people who can write scenarios like Shigesato Itoi can. Current game structures are being improved through the combination of elements from different game genres. I want to break away from that a bit. I think it would be ideal if I were able to create a game structure that represented a turning point, like the Famicom RPGs of old, for example. Miyamoto goes on to ask Yuji to consider developing for the Super Nintendo, for the new Super Nintendo console. So, from Miyamoto's own words, we were going to get a Zelda game that consisted of 3 party members, took more of an RPG approach, as the many references to RPGs suggest, and it was basically finished and ready to launch in 1989. However, we know the game wouldn't release until 1991. So, during the time between this interview and the game's original release after Dragon Quest, which was likely because Nintendo didn't want to have 2 major games competing with each other by being released around the same time, Nintendo or Miyamoto must have decided to keep working on Zelda 3. one of two things happened. They either decided to scrap everything that they had already made, or dropped the three-party system, most of the RPG mechanics, and reworked the entire game to focus on just one single character that would get a new weapon in each dungeon and work with what we now know as the traditional Zelda formula. Those extra 2 years of development must have changed a lot. It's just crazy to think that, again, in Miyamoto's own words, Zelda 3, an RPG take on the Zelda series that would combine the elements of Zelda 1 and 2 with a three-party system, was finished and ready to ship in 1989, 2 years before A Link to the Past was actually shipped. While myself and most Zelda fans are more than happy with what A Link to the Past ended up being, I would still love to know what Zelda 3 could have been. Who knows, as crazy as the idea sounds, it could have ended up even better, or it could have felt nothing like a Zelda game, which you have to think, at this time we had Zelda 1, which was a top-down open-world adventure game, and Zelda 2 was the complete opposite, but still a great mix of side-scrolling, platforming, RPG, and action. So for Zelda 3, who knows what most fans were expecting, with no real foundation of what a Zelda game should be. If you're a fan of videos like this that cover the history of cancelled games and consoles, be sure to subscribe, check out our Patreon to support this channel and the creation of new videos with your advice and input, and check out our top 5 cancelled games series and let us know what games you would like to see us cover in the future. So far we have lists covering the Zelda series, Mario, Nintendo, PlayStation, and plan to have dedicated videos covering a list of cancelled Sonic and Pokemon games, with this video being a taste of what to expect. In fact, because those videos tend to be on the longer side, many of you have asked for shorter videos, or videos on just a single game, which is how this new series, Gaming History, came to be. I want to thank you all for watching this video and welcome to the End Slate. If you're a fan of these videos, please subscribe and comment below to let me know your thoughts. If you would like to support this channel, please consider supporting on Patreon, where you can watch videos like this early and help me create longer videos like the top 10 best and worst of Ocarina of Time, Breath of the Wild, and the top 5 official Zelda games that have either been cancelled or just went unreleased. Finally, a huge thank you to this month's supporters: George Says Hi, Link Uses the Triforce, Transcendent Sacred Courage, Glenn Cassio, Prey Warrior, Victopedia, Rusty Caulfield, Robert W., Amanda Pina, Lunarium, Chris Gasparin, Harris Priest, Lovable Christie, Key of Time 15, Jerome Measure, Daryl Quinnen, Furzin 16, Kadrin, Magic Tech Review, and The Itch Network.